They called me a diversity hire, laughed when I stumbled during drills. One lieutenant actually slapped my beret off my head in front of everyone. They had no idea the woman they were humiliating had a classified file, one that would make their blood run cold when it finally hit that table. If you've ever been underestimated, judged by your appearance, or written off before you could prove yourself, this story is for you. Hit that like button, drop a comment with your own comeback story, and subscribe because you won't believe how this ends. My name is Rhiannon Steele, and the day I arrived at that forward operating base, I felt like I was stepping into a furnace. Not just because of the desert heat that hit me like a physical wall when I stepped off that transport truck, but because of what was waiting for me. I was 28 years old, carrying a worn duffel bag that had seen more countries than most people visit in a lifetime, and I was trying to blend in. That was the whole point. Stay quiet, stay observant. Don't stand out. But the moment my boots hit that dusty ground, I could feel the eyes on me, measuring, judging, dismissing. The base was exactly what you'd expect, rows of temporary structures, the constant rumble of generators, and that particular smell of diesel fuel mixed with sand that gets into everything. I reported to the administration building, got my bunk assignment, and told myself this would be like every other assignment. Keep your head down. Do your job. Get through it. Except this time, I knew it would be different. This time, I was there for a reason that had nothing to do with what anyone could see on my standard transfer papers. I met them that first afternoon during the daily briefing. Captain Brock Hendricks stood at the front of the room like he owned every molecule of air in it. 32, broad-shouldered, with that particular brand of confidence that comes from never truly being challenged. Next to him was Lieutenant Tavis Monroe, his shadow, his echo, the kind of guy who laughed at his commander's jokes a half-second before everyone else. And then there was Lieutenant Sienna Vale. She was the one who surprised me. I'd dealt with men who didn't want women in their ranks before, but the coldness in her eyes when she looked at me was something else entirely. It was personal before we'd ever spoken a word. I introduced myself professionally, Lieutenant Rhiannon Steele, transferred from Fort Bragg here to support operational readiness. Standard stuff. Brock looked me up and down like I was equipment that might be defective. Tavis smirked. And Sienna? She actually scoffed. Another desk jockey trying to play soldier, she said, loud enough for the entire room to hear. A few people laughed. Not everyone, but enough. I felt my face get hot, but I kept my expression neutral, nodded once, and took my seat in the back. That metallic taste of anxiety filled my mouth, the one that comes right before you realize you've walked into something worse than you anticipated. The next few days were a masterclass in subtle exclusion, morning briefings where they'd talk over me like I hadn't spoken, tactical planning sessions where my suggestions landed in silence before they moved on to the next topic. The mess hall became a particular kind of torture, watching them all sit together, their table full of easy laughter and inside jokes, while I ate alone, the scrape of my fork against the tray the loudest sound in my world. Every night in my quarters I'd stare at the ceiling and ask myself the same question: did I make the right choice coming here? But I already knew the answer. I just didn't know yet how much worse it would get before it got better. The first time they humiliated me in front of everyone, I was actually doing well. It was week 2, formation training in the main courtyard, and we were running through a complex tactical drill that required split-second timing and coordination. I'd done this drill 100 times before, more than that actually, but I was supposed to be just another lieutenant, so I held back just enough to seem competent but not exceptional. Except I miscalculated one transition, just slightly off pace for maybe 2 seconds, and Brock saw it. He blew his whistle so hard I swear the sound echoed off the mountains. Stop! Everyone stop! The entire platoon froze. 40 pairs of eyes suddenly had nowhere to look but at me. "Lieutenant Steele," Brock called out, his voice dripping with theatrical disappointment. "Let's see that sequence again, alone. Show everyone how it's done." The way he said it, everyone knew he meant the opposite. I stepped forward, my heart hammering against my ribs, sweat already dripping down my spine from the desert heat, and now from something much worse. I could feel every single person watching me, could hear someone shift their weight, the crunch of boots on gravel impossibly loud. I ran the drill solo, and this time I did it perfectly. Muscle memory taking over, my body knowing exactly what to do even when my mind was screaming. But before I could even finish, Tavis's voice cut through the silence. Maybe they sent us the wrong steel. Should have sent someone made of actual steel. Laughter rippled through the ranks like a wave, and I watched Brock's face split into a grin. He didn't correct Tavis, didn't restore order. He just let that laughter wash over me, let it soak into my skin like acid. I stood there, chest heaving, face burning, and nodded once before returning to formation. But something cracked inside me that day. Something that would later become unbreakable. The moment that changed everything happened 3 days later during equipment inspection. Sienna was conducting it, walking down the line with Brock and Tavis trailing behind her like predators. When she got to me, she took her time, pulling out every piece of my gear, examining it with exaggerated scrutiny. This is loose, this is dirty, this is improperly stored. None of it was true, but contradicting her would only make it worse, so I stood there at attention and took it. Then Brock stepped closer, invading my space, and I could smell the coffee on his breath. "You don't belong here, Steele," he said quietly, but not so quietly that others couldn't hear. "You're a liability, a PR stunt in uniform." I looked straight ahead, jaw tight, and said calmly, "Sir, I'm here to do my job, same as everyone else." That's when he did it. He reached out and slapped my beret off my head. It tumbled through the air in slow motion before hitting the dirt at my feet. The entire courtyard went silent. Not a breath, not a movement, just the weight of that moment crushing down on all of us. "You don't deserve to wear that," Brock said, his voice hard as granite. "You haven't earned anything here." I bent down slowly, picked up my beret, and dusted it off with hands that were trembling so badly I had to concentrate on each movement. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to tell him exactly who I was and watch his face crumble. But instead, I said nothing. I placed the beret back on my head, straightened it, and returned to attention. Because I knew something he didn't. My moment was coming. And when it did, everything would change. That night, I lay in my bunk staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment over and over. The slap of my beret hitting the dirt, the silence that followed, the way everyone just stood there and watched it happen. My hands were still shaking, not from fear anymore, but from rage I couldn't release. And then I heard them. Their voices drifted through my window from the courtyard below. Brock, Tavis, and Sienna, not even trying to keep their voices down. They were laughing, actually laughing. "Give her a week," Tavis said. "She's got that look, soft, probably never seen real action in her life." Sienna chimed in. "I give her 3 days. Did you see her face today? She's breaking." And Brock, his voice full of smug satisfaction. "Either way, she'll request a transfer soon. They always do." I sat up in that dark room, my reflection barely visible in the small mirror on the wall, and I felt something shift inside me. The hurt transformed into something harder, colder, more focused. I wouldn't leave. I wouldn't break. And I sure as hell wouldn't forget. The announcement came 2 days later during morning formation. A visiting high-ranking official would be conducting a comprehensive inspection of the base in 1 week. The energy shifted immediately, everyone snapping to attention, Brock's entire demeanor changing from casual arrogance to performative professionalism. I watched him transform into what he thought a leader should look like, barking orders about preparation protocols, inspection standards, making sure everything would be perfect for our distinguished visitor. He practically glowed with the opportunity to impress someone important. The base went into overdrive. Every surface scrubbed, every procedure reviewed, every uniform pressed to perfection. And I stayed quiet, watching it all unfold, feeling the days count down like a timer on something Brock couldn't see coming. During this time, I made one phone call. Brief, quiet. "Just checking in, I said to the voice on the other end, making sure everything was still on schedule. The response was clipped, professional, exactly what I needed to hear. I hung up and felt the first real smile cross my face in weeks. Around me, the base continued its frantic preparation, completely unaware that the inspection they were preparing for was going to be very different from what they imagined. The final briefing before the commander's arrival was almost comical. Brock stood at the front of the room, chest puffed out, going over every minute detail of the visit, where everyone would stand, what everyone would say, how everyone would represent this base as a model of military excellence. Then his eyes landed on me, and I saw the calculation happen in real time. "Lieutenant Steele," he said, and the room tensed. "You'll be handling equipment inventory during the inspection. Back warehouse. Keep everything organized and stay out of the way." Sienna smirked from across the room. "Stay in the back where you belong," she added, her voice sweet as poison. Every instinct in me wanted to object, to fight back, to tell them exactly what was about to happen, but I just nodded. "Yes, sir," I said quietly, because here's what they didn't understand. I didn't need to be in the front. I didn't need to be visible. The file spoke for itself. That night, the night before everything changed, I cleaned my uniform one last time, polished my boots until I could see my reflection, and I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not hope exactly, but certainty. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd successfully pushed out another woman who didn't belong. They had absolutely no idea what was coming through that gate tomorrow, and I couldn't wait to see their faces when they found out. The black SUVs rolled through the gate at exactly 0800 hours, and I felt my heartbeat sink with the rumble of their engines. From my position in the back of the formation, exactly where Brock had placed me, I watched the convoy come to a stop. The doors opened, and out stepped Commander General Ashton Cross. Even from a distance you could feel the weight of authority radiating off him, decorated, intimidating. The kind of officer whose mere presence made people stand straighter. I'd served under him before, back when things were very different, and seeing him here now made everything real. This was actually happening. Brock stood at the front of our formation, practically vibrating with eagerness to impress. Tavis and Sienna flanked him, all three of them wearing their most professional faces, all traces of their cruelty carefully hidden behind military bearing. General Cross walked the inspection line slowly, methodically, his eyes missing nothing. He stopped to speak with a few soldiers, asked pointed questions, nodded at responses. The entire base held its breath. And then he stopped. His eyes locked onto mine in the back row, and for just a moment, maybe half a second, something passed between us. Recognition. Understanding. Then he moved on, and I exhaled slowly, counting down the seconds until everything exploded. 20 minutes later, we were all called into the main conference room. Every officer on base crammed into that space, the air conditioning struggling against the combined body heat and tension. Brock positioned himself at the head of the table, clearly expecting to co-lead this meeting, to showcase his command. General Cross stood at the opposite end, his aide beside him carrying a leather portfolio. "I need to see Lieutenant Steele's personnel file," Cross said, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Immediately." Brock blinked, confused but compliant. "Of course, sir. Tavis, grab her transfer paperwork." Tavis scurried out and returned with a thin folder. My basic transfer documents, the ones everyone had seen. Cross didn't even open it. "No," he said, and the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Her complete file. Her classified file." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched Brock's face as confusion gave way to the first flicker of concern. Sienna and Tavis exchanged glances. Nobody moved. Cross nodded to his aide, who produced a sealed envelope from the portfolio, marked with red letters, "Top Secret." The sound of that file hitting the conference table was like a gunshot, every eye in the room fixed on it. Cross opened it slowly, deliberately, and I could see pages and pages of documentation, photographs, commendations, my entire history laid bare. He began to read aloud, his voice steady and clinical. "Lieutenant Rhiannon Steele, 5 years special operations, Commando unit, 3 active combat tours. Brock's face went pale. Silver Star recipient for valor under fire during Operation Sand Viper. Tavis stared at the table like he could disappear into it. Classified hostage rescue operation, October 2023. Sole survivor of a 12-person extraction team who still completed the mission objective. Sienna's hands gripped the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. Cross-spread photographs across the table. Me in full combat gear in places I couldn't name. Me receiving medals from people whose faces were redacted. Mission reports with paragraphs blacked out. Evidence of a career that made everyone in this room look like children playing dress-up. Then Cross looked up, his eyes sweeping the room before landing on Brock. Lieutenant Steele was embedded undercover at this base for the past 8 weeks, he said, and I watched Brock's world collapse in real time. Her mission: assess leadership quality and unit cohesion. He paused, let that sink in. Her report details systematic harassment, abuse of authority, and conduct unbecoming of officers in the United States military. General Cross turned to me, and the weight of every eye in that room followed. Lieutenant Steele, he said, his voice formal but with an edge that told me he'd read every word of my report, seen every detail of what they'd done. Anything to add? I stood slowly, feeling my legs steady beneath me for the first time in weeks. I looked at Brock, then Tavis, then Sienna. Their faces were masks of horror, disbelief, desperate calculation. I could have stayed silent. The files said everything, but I needed them to hear this from me. I've served with real soldiers, I said, my voice calm and clear. Warriors who earned their ranks through blood and sacrifice, who understood that leadership means protecting those under your command, not tearing them down to make yourself feel powerful. What I witnessed here wasn't command. It was cowardice wearing insignia it didn't deserve. Brock tried to speak, his mouth opening, some excuse or justification forming on his lips. Cross silenced him with a single look. Captain Hendricks, you are hereby stripped of your command, effective immediately. You will face a formal court-martial hearing for conduct unbecoming, abuse of authority, and creating a hostile environment. Until that hearing, you are confined to quarters. I watched the color drain completely from Brock's face, watched him transform from the arrogant man who'd slapped my beret into the dirt to someone small and frightened. Cross continued, his voice like the reading of a death sentence. Lieutenant Monroe, you are demoted to the rank of second lieutenant and will be reassigned to logistics support at Forward Operating Base Kelton. That was about as remote as you could get, a place where careers went to die slowly. Tavis couldn't even look up from the table, and then Cross turned to Sienna. Lieutenant Vale, you are formally reprimanded and placed under probationary review. One more incident, one more complaint, and your military career is over. Understood. She nodded, her face flushed with shame and rage. Military police entered the room. I hadn't even noticed them waiting outside, and escorted all 3 of them out. Brock looked back at me once, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Genuine fear. Not of punishment, but of the fact that he'd completely misjudged who he was dealing with. The door closed behind them, and the remaining officers sat in stunned silence. Some looked ashamed. Others looked shocked. A few were nodding slowly, and I wondered how many of them had witnessed what happened and said nothing, how many had wanted to speak up but didn't know how. Over the next few days, something unexpected happened. Soldiers started approaching me, quietly, when no one else was around. A young private named Chen found me in the mess hall and stood there awkwardly until I asked him to sit down. I wanted to speak up, he said, staring at his hands. That day he hit your beret off. I wanted to say something, but He couldn't finish. I understood. The courage it takes to stand against that kind of toxic authority when you're at the bottom of the chain of command is immense. Now you know better, I told him, and I meant it without judgment. So do better. That's all any of us can do. He nodded, and I saw relief wash over his face. Relief that I wasn't angry at him, that there was a path forward. More came after that. Stories I hadn't known about. Other people Brock had targeted, other ways Tavis had made people's lives hell, other instances of Sienna's cruelty. It wasn't just about me. It had never been just about me. This was a pattern, a culture of toxicity that had infected this base long before I arrived. And now, finally, it was being cut out like the cancer it was. 3 weeks after the file hit that table, I stood in front of my first formation as the commanding officer of the unit. The sun was just starting to rise over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and I looked out at the faces of soldiers who were now under my command. Some of them had watched me get humiliated and said nothing. Some had laughed. Some had wanted to help but didn't know how. And now they were all watching me, waiting to see what kind of leader I would be. I could have used this moment for revenge, could have made their lives as miserable as mine had been, but that's not what real leadership looks like. I'm not here to punish anyone for what happened, I told them, my voice carrying across the courtyard. I'm here to build something better. A unit based on respect, on earned authority, on the understanding that real strength isn't about tearing people down, it's about lifting them up. We're going to train harder, work smarter, and treat each other like the professionals we're supposed to be. I saw shoulders straighten, saw something shift in the air. Hope, maybe, or just relief that they weren't going to suffer for someone else's sins. The changes came quickly. New training protocols focused on teamwork instead of hierarchy, open communication channels where anyone could report concerns without fear, standards that applied to everyone equally, regardless of rank or how long they'd been on base. And slowly, day by day, I watched the unit transform. The tension that had hung over everything like a fog began to lift. People started trusting each other again. The mess hall filled with conversation instead of hostile silence. It wasn't perfect. Change never is, but it was real. Letters started arriving at my office, forwarded through official channels. Other soldiers from Brock's previous postings, people I'd never met, thanking me for speaking up. Their stories were heartbreaking. A female corporal who'd been driven out of the service entirely, a junior officer who'd developed anxiety so severe he couldn't function. Lives damaged by someone who should have been protecting them. I kept every letter in a locked drawer, a reminder that this was never just about me getting even. It was about stopping a pattern that had destroyed too many good people. General Cross returned 6 weeks later for a follow-up inspection. The transformation was obvious even to him. The base ran smoothly, efficiently, with none of the underlying tension that had poisoned it before. He pulled me aside after the inspection, and we walked to the edge of the base where we could talk privately. We've been tracking toxic leadership patterns across multiple installations, he told me, his voice low. You were our test case, a highly qualified officer going undercover to document and expose it from the inside. I looked at him, understanding fully for the first time just how calculated this had all been. You passed, Lieutenant. They failed spectacularly. I nodded, but I had to be honest with him. I almost quit, I admitted. That night after he hit my beret in the dirt, I sat in my room and almost called it off, almost said this wasn't worth it. Cross studied me for a long moment. But you didn't. And that's what separates real leaders from people just wearing the uniform. Real leaders endure. They take the hit and stay standing. They let themselves be underestimated right up until the moment they prove everyone wrong. That evening, I stood alone at the edge of the base, watching the sun set over the same mountains I'd watched it rise over weeks ago. My beret sat perfectly on my head, exactly where it belonged. They saw a woman and decided that meant weak. I showed them a warrior. They wanted me to break. I became unbreakable. My name is Lieutenant Rhiannon Steele, and I want you to remember this. Never let anyone's limited imagination define your capacity. They'll mock what they don't understand. They'll fear what they can't control. And when your moment comes, and it will come, let your actions speak so loudly that their words become nothing but echoes of their own insecurity. That beret in the dirt taught me something powerful. Sometimes you have to let them think they've won, stay quiet while they celebrate their cruelty, and wait for the moment when the truth hits the table. Because when it does, when that file slams down and reality crashes into their delusions, there's no comeback, no excuse, just the cold, hard truth of who you really are versus who they assumed you were. If this story moved you, smash that like button right now. Share it with someone who needs to hear this today, someone who's been underestimated, dismissed, or made to feel like they don't belong. Subscribe and turn on notifications because we're telling more stories about people who refused to be broken, who turned their pain into power, and who proved that patience and truth are the ultimate revenge. Drop a comment below. What's the moment you proved someone wrong? What's your comeback story? I'll be reading every single one, and I want to hear how you turned your doubters into believers. Until next time, stay strong, stay sharp, and never, ever let them see you break. Because your moment is coming. And when it does, make sure it counts.